Welcome, everybody. We're back again. Yes, my name is still Ade Balogun. I am your host and moderator for Atlanta Discuss. But today I'm not going to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Like I always say, my Australian friends told me just say good day. Yes, good day covers up for everything. So good day to the 7 billion people in the 7 continents of the world. Welcome to Atlanta Discuss. Yes, today it's uh it's going to be a very good day. We have another fantastic guest, an erudite scholar in the house. So it's going to be interesting. So Antarctica, Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, we're here again. So enjoy the ride. Today we're going to talk about party supremacy in Nigeria and African countries, So is it a myth or a reality? That's what we're going to discuss. And we have a wonderful person in the house, the man that fits the billing. His name is Oseloka H. Obaze. Mr. Obaze, welcome to Atlanta Discuss.
Thank you, Ade. It's a pleasure to be here. Good day, audience, wherever you may be.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'm sure a lot of you know him already, but I'm going to introduce him properly to you. Mr. Oseloka Obaze, HO, we all call him, yeah. He's the managing director and chief executive officer Oseloka Consult Limited. That's a policy and government management consulting and advisory firm. Mr. Obaze has served as the campaign manager for the Obidati 2023 presidential campaign organization. In 2019, he served as the Anambra State chairman of the Atiku Obi Presidential Campaign Council. He contested for the Anambra State governorship in 2017 as a candidate of the People's Democratic Party. Mr. Obaze was the secretary to the Anambra State government, and secretary to the state government, then from 29th of June 2012 to 8 June 2015. Before that, he served as the United Nations official from 1991 to 2012 and as a Nigerian Foreign Service officer from 1982 to 1991. Yeah, we have a consummate diplomat in the house. He's seasoned international civil servant, you can see from what I'm reading, diplomat and strategic policy advisor. Mr. Obaze has a diverse and substantial background in political processes and a wealth of diplomatic mediation, peace and security and conflict resolution experience in national and international affairs. Who else fits the billing here? Including direct experience in working on countries facing complex challenges in Europe and Africa. From 2007 to 2012, Mr. Obaze was a senior political affairs officer, policy advisor with the United Nations headquarters in New York and a member of the managerial team in the Security Council branch. We serve the UN Security Council. In that capacity, and for 5 years, he served as the secretary of the Security Council ad hoc working group on conflict prevention and resolution in Africa and trip coordinator for Security Council mission. Wow, wow, wow. Mr. Obaze holds a Master's of Arts in Political Science, MA from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, that's in 1980. Bachelor of Science in Political Science, BS from Nebraska, Wesleyan University, Lincoln, Nebraska. He holds a certificate in diplomacy from the Nigerian Foreign Service Academy, Lagos, Nigeria, 1983. Certificate in peacekeeping and preventive diplomacy from the UNITA, that's the International Peacekeeping Academic course. That's in Austria. That was 1996. Certificate in early warnings and preventive measures from the UN Security College. Turin in Italy, that was the 1999, certificate in facilitation of dialogue, process and mediation effort of the role. That's in the academy from Sweden, that was in 2007. So Mr. Obaze is an co-author of 6 books, Joe Gaba's Legacy. Yes, Joe Gaba, as you all know, retired military man, another consummate diplomat, collection of poems, and so on and so forth. Mr. Obaze is a repertoire of intellectualism, consummate diplomat, civil servant, patriots. The man fits the billing. So today, he's the secretary to state government and he's a diplomat. I mean, this guy just fits everything we like at Atlanta Discuss. Knowledgeable, exact, pinpoint, and accurate. And here, we just go for the facts, we go for the juggler. Mr. Obaze fits the billing. Topic remains party supremacy in Nigeria and African politics. Is it a myth or reality? Mr. Obaze, let's keep the ground running. Can you please tell us what party supremacy is in politics, really? You have the floor, sir.
Well, It's a question of the cup being half full or half empty. Is it a myth or a reality? And it depends. It depends on where you stand. The politicians will tell you it's a reality. The academicians will tell you it's a myth. But interestingly, just a few days ago, which is quite coincidental, there was a very seminal piece published titled "The Crisis of African Democracy," written by Comfort Ero and Morichi Motiga, which has just been published in the January 2024 edition of Foreign Affairs. And that piece looks at the nexus between politics and the recent rise of military coups in Africa. And the question have always been asked, if this rise in military coup, or what I prefer to call a military anti-politics, is commensurate with the illiberalism of African democracies, where you begin to find that the parties are not actually what they set out to be. And there's been this initially this great acceptance because of independence, and then we reverted to a point where there were some disgruntlement. But let me preface my comments answering your question with certain information by way of background. If you remember, about 25 African countries became independent between 1960 and 1962. And before that, there were about 11 countries that had become independent, I think, starting with Liberia in 1847 and Morocco in 1958. But the bulk of the African troops that became independent were in that 1960 sphere. That includes Nigeria. And those nationalists who fought for independence became the successor leadership immediately after independence. In Nigeria, you had Azikiwe, Amadu Bello, Tafawa Balewa, and the rest of them. In Ghana, you had Nkrumah and the rest of them. Zambia, Kone Kaunda, Julius Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. On the flip side, the French colonies, and I think there were about 12 of them that became independent at the same period, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, and the rest of them, Gabon and Cameroon, adopted a presidential type of government. What it was actually was a centralized federalist system, but the British colonies, Nigeria included, defaulted to the parliamentary system, which was quite helpful. The other aspect, to put it in perspective, you would also understand, was that there were countries that had to fight for independence, literally, militarily. Algeria, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Madagascar, Mozambique, Namibia, and to some extent, because of the Mau Mau, Kenya. Because of that armed resistance and the prominence given to those who fought in the liberation struggle, it became inevitable that they had to transition from liberation forces to parties. The difference is that for countries like Nigeria that didn't go to fight, didn't have armed struggle, there was accommodation but less discipline in terms of hierarchy. In those countries that fought, you already had the military hierarchy of the liberation movement, and now that also transformed into the party system. So that helped in a lot of ways to create the circumstances under which you had to value the essence of party supremacy. Now, since we're going to deal with Nigeria and South Africa and perhaps Ghana as example, in South Africa, the ANC was a liberation movement up till the end. It transformed into a party. In Nigeria, there was an independence struggle all political tendencies from the North-South coalesced. There was a debate as to whether it should come in the 1950s, like Ghana 58 or thereabout, or if it should come in the 60s. The majority won out, and it came in the 60s. But because it was democracy, and because we were trying to practice democracy, you also had to take into account the fact that there had to be consensus. Therefore, the supremacy of the party were in certain ways far more diluted, as opposed to what you were trying to, or what you saw in the military formations. But what had also happened was that in a place like Ghana, once they got independence, they declared that they did not want multi-party system, or the ruling party more or less. It declared that it needed to be in control of what had happened. But the essence of what has happened is that where the parties won election and were in power, they had the responsibility of governance and managing the party affairs. Where they were out of power, they had the responsibility of the opposition and also managing the affairs of the party. And invariably, because the politics here in Africa and Nigeria and some parts of Africa is almost a zero-sum game where it is not parliamentary, winner takes all, you found that the imperative of party supremacy and discipline became almost ultimate in terms of what happened. In Nigeria, there were alliances that were forged, which led to formation of government. In Ghana, the party won and stayed that way. In South Africa, and I'm being comparative here, the ANC won. There were other parties, but that was after the apartheid regime. But the structure and the hierarchical structure remained in place. The other example of one party rule came in Uganda, I think, in 1986, when Museveni won election and decided that there were no parties. So there was one party and other was. So there were alliances that were formed in 1950s in Nigeria, 1960s, and we saw it again in 2013 when APC was formed. Why am I going through all this background? It's to put in perspective the fact that party supremacy is a reality where the party is functional, where you don't have people leaving the party where they are to go to other parties out of disgruntlement or out of disenfranchisement. But it's also a myth, because the certain people lack the discipline of saying that we are willing to stay with this party for as long as possible, regardless of the outcome. If you look at Nigeria today, there are very few people in politics that will tell you, I am a foundation member of PDP and I've been here from the beginning to the end. Before that, somewhere in NRC, somewhere in SDP, but you can't blame them because the circumstances change all that. The reality was that where you had the single party regimes, they were more disciplined, there were more enforcement, and that gave inclination to party supremacy, less than where you had democratic institution. But what has happened broadly, is that single party regimes were even compelled after 1990s to begin to rethink their methodologies and modalities. And that happened because, coincidentally, in the 1990s, the end of the Cold War, the end of non-alignment, the beginning of globalization, and what was referred to as the third wave of democratization. So there was also a tendency for people to segue into becoming conformist. So that's reality where it were. But in the nutshell, the countries where, like Ghana, Nkrumah, Tanzania, where you had Chama Chama Pinduzi, the party, Ghana had CPC, and in Malawi, Heston Banda, Kamuzu Banda, yeah. Yes. And in 1966, and eventually Kaunda in 1972, maintained a rigid party structure in which members understood that being a party of the member, like you have in Communist China, the Central Party, was a privilege, and you stayed the course. Today, the only place you have that type of structure is in Uganda, the Sahrawi Democratic Republic, and Eritrea. In other countries, you have multi-party systems. And
what about Rwanda, sir?
Sorry?
Rwanda
is amorphous in a way, because
amorphous. Oh, okay.
in principle they're supposed to have a multi-party system. But the man in charge who has the benefit of doing very well in governance, and therefore there's a level of tolerance in terms of the threshold for what he's done. But critics will say that he's running a single party system. Yes, that's we're talking about Paul Kagame, and that's the reality. So, in a nutshell, I would say that those countries in Africa that drifted towards the one-party system were assured more of party supremacy than those who were democratic and therefore had to build consensus in order to reach, or build an alliance in order to be able to govern. But I must tell you something, though. In our country, Nigeria, during the Second Republic, the chairman of the party, when they spoke, it was the law. That is no longer the case now. You see party chairman being rusticated. As a matter of fact, if you annoy people in your party, they go to your ward and they instigate your ward chairman to dismiss you at the ward level. And once that happens, you're gone. But when Akinloye and the rest of them were chairman of party in Nigeria in the Second Republic, when they spoke, people listened. And there was respect. And I think that continued to a certain degree, even at the earliest part of the second wave of democratization in 1999. So yes, we can say there's party supremacy is real under certain parameters and circumstances. By and large, it is myth, because if it wasn't a myth, if you challenge the party hierarchy and you were sanctioned, you would obey the sanctions, take your punishment, and stay, knowing fully well that if you left to another party, they will say, well, if this man was rebellious in his party, he's going to be rebellious here. Why should we take you? But that is not the case. This trade-off, carpet crossing and decamping and all whatnot, shows a level of party indiscipline and a level of lack of party supremacy. I will give you an example of party supremacy. South Africa. In 2008, when the party had a problem with Thabo Mbeki, they asked him to resign. He was the president of the country, duly elected by the people. They forced him to resign. And understanding, being that he came from the ranks of ANC, as Assistant Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Affairs Secretary, then Vice President and President, he had to resign. I don't see that, and that shows you the enormity of the strength of the party. I don't see that happening in Nigeria. I don't even see that happening in Ghana, which was one of the first and early purveyors of a party supremacy and centralized party system.
I just had something to what you said about Mbeki. Just quickly, firstly, Atlantic discourse, it's a discussion, so we also have an opinion on this thing. Mbeki, when they had the talks with de Klerk and all that way back then, when Mandela picked Mbeki to be second vice president, even in the hierarchy then, it was low down the line. And Ramaphosa, who is president now, who was Secretary General of the UNC, was all in all young, powerful, and mighty, also was interested in that first vice president position. And we read at that time that Mandela told him, look, Cyril, calm down. I need a more young, vibrant person, somebody that had diplomatic and international experience, which Mbeki had at that time, and Ramaphosa did not have. And everybody heeded to what Mandela said. So I think it was just a matter of time for Ramaphosa to be president, and it was also a matter of time for Mbeki to run into brick walls and all that. But having said all that, I think what is key there was that when the party spoke, and they held sway, and the rest is history. But if you look at it also, sir, most of these countries are not better off. The South Africa of today has a lot of issues that we all are not happy about. Now they take light in South Africa and all that. Even Nkrumah, when it was overthrown by the military, had a lot of issues that are very verifiable. So my question to you as a Nigerian is this: did military incursion, because I think now, if the coup of 66, for example, in Nigeria, the coup in Ghana had not happened, we don't have a record of coup in South Africa yet, and we pray we don't. If the military did not come in 62 in Nigeria and in Ghana when they overthrew Nkrumah, despite all the issues we had in Nigeria then, let's using Nigeria as a focal point now, do you think we'll be better off now if the military didn't come in at all?
Well, it's a question of chicken and egg, because if you look at it, did the disenchantment lead to the military getting into government, or did the military ambitious intervention was it explained as having been triggered by disenchantment? But the truth of the matter is that you have to take a holistic approach looking at this. And since 1950, globally, there have been about 400, almost 500, I think 492 military coups around the world. And as you know, 220, I think the one of the ones in West Africa recently was the 220th coup in Africa, and of the lot attempted coups, I should say, of the lot, 109 of them were successful, including those in Nigeria and Ghana in the early stages. But remember, the coup started predominantly in Latin America, and it was a form of a revolution. And in some countries of Latin America that had coups earlier, the subsequent governance modalities led to reforms, a groundswell of reforms that were beneficial to the people. That was not always the case in Africa. So to say that things would have been different is to second guess the reality. But I can tell you this. I'm not an apologist for military rule. I have served under military government and I have served under civilian government. But I can tell you this. There are things the military can do that elected civilian governments cannot do. Let's take, for instance, in Nigeria. In our 64 years, with the exception of the creation of the Midwestern region, no elected civilian government has been able to create one state, not one. All the states that has been created in Nigeria were created by the military. So let me phrase that. The military has been able to restructure Nigeria where civilians have failed. That is a point there. And with the military government, because it is more cost effective to a certain degree, because you don't have the large parliament and everything, but also because you have the military and they rule by decree, it's a lot easier to pass electoral acts. The change of the naira denomination from pounds to naira was done by the military. The census was done by the military. Converting Nigeria from right-hand drive to left-hand drive was done by the military. There was a lot the military achieved. And the military, as a matter of fact, from when they intervened in 1966 up till the Babangida era, stuck to the National Development Plan, which was a short, medium, and long-term development strategy. The civilians have not been able to do that. They've given us Vision 2020, Vision 2010, but they've not been able to implement that. So you can say that, yes, it is sexy, it is preferable, it is, we want to all say, yes, we're Democrats. Therefore, we are more sympathetic towards the democratic regime and elected governance because it gives chance for people to serve. But by the same token, comparative analysis, when you look back at some of the things that have been accomplished here, it was done under the military. The consolidation of the banks in this country was done by the Abacha regime, which most people would tell you is the worst possible regime that has ruled Nigeria. But they achieved certain things in governance. So we have to put all those in perspective. The downside of our democracy, as you know, is that we now complain about the unwieldiness of the democratic system and the presidential system. Now there are calls about going back to the parliamentary system. The difference as a social scientist is that in the parliamentary system, we've just finished the presidential election. It would have meant that if PDP coming in second won 30% of the electoral vote, they will have 30% representation in the parliament. Labour coming third, if they had 15%, would have 15% representation. And then the winning party would have. But it also would make it imperative for whoever is the president to come to the parliament at all times to be queried by the opposition. We don't have that anymore. So there are benefits that are there. And when we look at it in terms of lessons learned and missed opportunities, but depending on where you stand at any time, one would say that the democracy in its most ill-adjusted form is still preferred over any form of government. And I'm being academic now.
Okay. Do you think Africa as a continent should evolve or come up with its own type of democracy? I think former President Obaze just said something like that recently. Something that worked for us. Nigeria, for example, 774 local government, 200 million people were told. Because I'm asking you two questions in one now, because do you think we need an African style of democracy? That's question number one. Number two is this. Under the Commonwealth, there are 3-4 experiments I've looked at. India is one. I'm sure you're very conversant with this. From India, Pakistan broke out and subsequently Bangladesh, and India today is still the most populous country in the world. They just beat China to it sometime in August this year. Now, India, multi-ethnic, multi-diverse, all those things we call problems in Nigeria, they still occur in India. I remember when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, there was no military coup in India. In most African countries, that would be automatic recipe for coup. Subsequently, the son became Prime Minister Rajiv. He also was assassinated by bomb blast, and there was no coup. So India, yes, volatile democracy, but it's held on and they're doing well, nuclear superpower. Second experiment, look at Malay now, Malaysia and Singapore. India, we know, broke into three. Malay broke into two. Then we come closer to Africa. You have what you call Sudan and South Sudan. Now, so the second question to this is this. It's with all the religious disturbance, Plateau State, ethnic killing, and all that, is Nigeria too big to be managed? I mean, because India, with its own diversity, is still allowed two chunks of it to go out. So, do we need our own type of democracy that can work for us because we're ethnically and religious based people? The second one is that is Nigeria too big to be managed?
Nigeria is not too big to be managed, but Nigeria is also not too big to fail. And that you have to understand. It's all about commitment to national interest and diversity. You give example of India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. You give India of Malay. You give an example of Sudan and South Sudan. But you must also think of what happened in the Soviet Union. It collapsed, like they would say, but it just fragmented. And most of those states, for lack of better adjectival qualification, are stable. Whether they meet your parameters of Western democracy or not is immaterial. But then look at the former Yugoslavia. At the outset, what used to be Yugoslavia under Tito started fragmenting. Slovenia left peacefully and has remained stable and peaceful. The former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia left, and it's a country. The hump, which was Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and the rest of them, ended up in conflict. So it's a mindset. Can we coexist together? Or can we separate and coexist independently? It takes an enormous amount of commitment on the part of the national intelligentsia to say, look, if we want to stay together, let's do this thing we've been talking about called restructuring. A weak central government, strong regional government or state governments. Every state in Nigeria has some degree of comparative advantage in terms of what you produce and what makes you sustainable. But the reality is that we have also created 36 states when we know that some states are not viable. What that would require then is to say, well, are we going to merge Zamfara with Yobe? Are we going to merge the KKK states together to form one entity? And are we going to merge the North Central of Benue, Kogi? What is Kogi today and Kwara used to be one state. What is Plateau and Benue today used to be one state. It's fragmented. If it becomes imperative for them to find common cause to say, yes, we can exist, then that is a possibility. The problem that we see is not that we cannot go our separate ways. It is just that because over the years we have centralized resources into a common pool, and it was shared through FAC, equitably or non-equitably, that depends on where you sit. But if you look at the reality, oil from the south has been used to develop the country. But there was Nigeria that was functional and productive before oil. What was the underpinning value of that Nigeria? You had Northern Nigeria Development Corporation, NNDC. Mm-hmm. You have ENDC, Eastern Nigeria Development Corporation, and you have WNDC. These were the hub for development, and each region focused on their comparative advantage, produce what they produce best, put money in the federal coffers that helped us run the nation. The cocoa, the West produced cocoa and everything else. The North produced granite pyramids, tin and ore, solid minerals. The East did palm oil and rubber and things like that. And even the Midwest went into palm oil. Today, there is no part of Nigeria that is incapable of having some kind of comparative advantage. Northeast, to a certain degree, is the food basket of Nigeria. If you look at it, there are arable lands there. You go to places like Taraba, Niger, the state of Niger. You go to the northwest. There's an enormous amount of solid mineral. Today in Zamfara, gold is being mined. The amount of the money that comes from gold is not being put into the federal coffer like oil, but it's mineral, and by law, it should go into but it's being privatized and it's being used by the state. These are the things that people see and they say, there is no equity here, there's no fairness, there's injustice. If you want a federation, let everybody come to the table, come with clean hands. If you're producing gold, tell us you've produced XYZ amount of gold that is worth 20 trillion. Then by derivation, which is what we've done for oil, take your 13% and let the rest of it go to the federal coffer to be shared. If you're doing that for oil, you can do that for bauxite, you can do that for uranium, you can do that for titanium. Some of these are minerals you can find in Nigeria. So if you go, and then even liquefied natural gas, we have a big oil reserve in Bauchi. Will the principles that governed oil produced in Ondo as an oil producing state, Rivers, Delta, Edo, Bayelsa, would those principles be applied to the oil reserve in Bauchi? So these are the things. If you can come to the table and get people to say, yes, since this was the rule of the road when we first discovered oil, same thing applies. Now in solid mineral, the same thing should also apply. Then that is the way it's supposed to be. Let me give you a hypothetical example. Every state used to collect value-added tax, VAT. Some states more than others because they had consumption capacity and things like that, production. Mm-hmm. And it went to the federal level where it was distributed. Now, sitting in Lagos, part of your VAT comes from high consumption of alcohol. Maybe same thing in Anambra or Cross Rivers where it is consumed. In Kano, you're not allowed to sell alcohol. So you make money, you make VAT, you derive VAT and you put it in the federal coffers and it's shared equitably. The argument is this: VAT is internally generated revenue. If I'm producing more revenue than the other states, then I should be allowed to take 13% of what I produce, and then the balance goes to the federal coffers. If you can apply that to oil, which is a revenue earner, foreign exchange earner, you can apply that to gold, you can apply that to VAT, you can apply that to cobalt, to uranium, you begin to find stability. But the problem in Nigeria is that we've never been able to get the elite to rally to a consensus on what is primary in terms of what needs to be done to keep the federation whole.
A quick follow-up before I go to the next question. You've referenced the Nigerian intelligentsia like 4 times, and a group I think is almost non-existent right now because of the morals and the decadence we find in the entire system. So I mean, going through all your work, you're an expert on conflict resolution. You've done a lot of that in Africa. even at the UN level, Security Council, and all that. So the next question I'm going to ask you, it's a direct question because of the experience. Now, all the parameters and indices for declaring a state a failed state, Nigeria have clicked it, almost all. I'm sure if there's a particular one we've not clicked, maybe we're on the verge of just linking it, And before this interview, the last set I had, the topic was weak state, collapse state, failed state, causes and indicators. Nigeria as a focal point. Had Professor Dinkalu, had Shehu Soni, and Pastor Itwa, and I asked them this question I'm going to ask you, and the question is Nigeria a failed state?
I'm a political scientist by training, and I am very careful in terms of definitions. They can become self-defeating. And as you know, social science is not a rocket science. It's not hard science. So 1 + 1 does not always add up to 2. There's a broad spectrum. And I think of the 3 people who are all my friends that you mentioned, Odinkalo, Itwa, and Sani, I think I'm inclined to agree with Senator Sani to say that Nigeria is a failed state at this point. And I've seen failed states. I've seen Somalia, where there's no government. You had the Janjaweed and everybody running around. And we haven't gotten to that point. We have a swat of non-state actors controlling certain portions, certain local governments in certain states. If you think of Zamfara, think of part of Borno, think about parts of Niger State, think of part of Kaduna State, where non-state actors, bandits, have taken over villages, collecting taxes and all whatnot, running some form of government. If you quantify that, we've talked about 4 or 5 states, which is still out of the 36 states of the Federation, is minuscule in terms of the rest of the country. For Nigeria to become a failed state, I would presume we have reached to the level where you are not sure of who is in charge in Akwa Ibom. You're not sure of who is in charge because of militancy in Bayelsa and Rivers. You're not sure of who is in charge in Benue and Kogi and Plateau because of the banditry and the headsmen. Today, we have governance structures at the local and state levels, even though in places like Plateau today and in Niger State, some villages have been sacked, uprooted, displaced, and that's why we have a lot of IDPs. So it's a stretch to say that Nigeria is a failed state at this point. What we are doing is that we are showing broad indices that could lead to a failed state. We have a military that is centralized, a very important national institution. The hierarchy is intact. The command and control is intact. There's no question about that. We've not had mutinies in the military. We have a police structure that is federal. We don't have state police. But even in some areas, don't forget that this insecurity led to the founding of Amoteku and Odubago in the east, Amoteku in the southwest, Hishab police in the north. These are structures that would not allow you to define those areas as components of a failed state. If, for instance, it had become totally impossible to say, well, we don't know who's in charge of Ogun State, we don't know where the governor is, or there are 5 people claiming to be the governors of the state, then you will begin to say, yes, perhaps we'll arrive at that. But, we tend to be emotive, we tend to be very sentimental. And this whole claim of Nigeria being a failed state is a measure of our own expectation of where we ought to be and how low we have sunken. And I think that's and it's just a combination of the optics and sound bites. People sometimes use terminologies they are not clearly sure of what to say. But like the cliche says, the hood does not make the monk. You can anybody can put on a hood, but by and large, you have to be ordained to be a monk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's go to the last election. I know you played a major role for the Labour Party. Labour Party clearly had a very strong showing. I remember in the beginning, people said there were just 4 people tweeting in one room, and lo and behold, they had a very strong showing. And so these are 2 questions in one. Now, so what do you think Labour Party did very well at the last election, and what do you think they did not do well and they need to improve on going forward?
Well, let me put since I was in the trenches and I was a key player, the measures of the Labour Party was fortuitous. It was a leap of faith and an experiment that had infinite possibilities. Labour Party went beyond public expectations, but it also fell short of the expected catalytic niche, which was to change the country, change the governance, and take over. And I know, party politics is a game of numbers and structures. And as such, the retail politics in Nigeria is highly transactional. That was a checkoff before the fact against Labour Party. It was expected that money would play a critical role in the 2023 elections, and it did. What sealed the process and perhaps was not, was not expected was the role that weak institutions, starting with the INEC, the security agencies, and eventually the judiciary, played in the elections. There were other factors that perhaps in terms of analysis and writings we would grapple with later. There were pro-establishment forces, some seen and some unseen, including the so-called owners of Nigeria. And that's no longer a cliche. You've heard that used several times.
That's true.
I know this for a fact, that they, as sympathetic as some of them might have been to Labour, were not willing to give power to somebody with whom they had not negotiated before the fact how the country would be run, whether the country was going to be restructured, and how the largesse, the so-called national cake, oil block and everything, was going to be shared. That was a big risk, and it was a risk they could not afford. And I believe that a win by Labour Party and Obi Dati in 2023 would have resulted in the early retirement of some of these owners of Nigeria, the stakeholders, people who enjoy and control the natural resources of Nigeria and hold it, quote unquote, at the behest of the rest of us. It included old school politicians, retired generals, bureaucrats, and rent seekers, people who sit at their home, do nothing, they sit in front of a laptop and they collect money in terms of oil subsidy and things like that. So the preference was to continue business as usual. In terms of what Labour did and Labour did not do, I think that was a paradox. There was a paradox in context. Labour Party had a national leadership, but did not have the structures nationwide. The obedient movement was organic, had structures all over the country, but did not have a singular or collective national leadership that was identifiable, that the Labour could interface with, form an alliance to justify the end, which the means of the process was the election. Not everybody who said, I'm obedient, was really a registered Labour Party member. That was very clear. And because of that, there were also divided loyalties. There were people who were obedient that were loyal to Peter Obi and Dati, but not to Labour. So you had some element of distrust, even if it did not manifest fully, but you didn't have ample time to iron those things out. And because PDP, APC had larger structures, a bigger swath of financiers, they had ministers, they had governors, they had senators, they were able to manipulate this. Of course, the downside of our politics has always been stomach infrastructure. Campaign financing was not thoroughly addressed. The electoral law came into being very late. And the fact that a woman who's not fed her family for a week and you offered her 5,000 would take your 5,000 naira and vote for you, whether she liked you or not. What was material for her at that point is that for the next 1 week, her family was going to feed. So these were the challenges. So you can say that Labour did all it could do within its limited resources, within its structure and framework, but it was not sufficient to overcome the established way of doing politics in Nigeria. It was not sufficient to upend the process, even if it meant buying votes or buying the institutions. And of course, there was the flip side of it, where people said that the obedience were obnoxious, abusing everybody. But it's like a man who's drowning. He will grab you and pull you down. And if it became the survival of the fittest, for the obedient, Peter Obi was like a titular bishop that owned a parish, which he doesn't even know where it is, but he's the head of that parish. It was a special purpose vehicle. And if you notice that when he strayed, they also dragged him. They did not cut him any slack. So, but he could not tell the obedient, you must do this or you must do that. No, the obedients did what they wanted to do. The strength of the obedient movement, their strength in numbers, their being vociferous and being loud and active and dominating the social media and everything, turned out to also be their weakness, because in politics, you have to be structured. You have to have a game plan. Where are we going, left and right? If the dichotomy between the obedience and Labour had not happened, what Labour would have benefited was to use the obedience structure down to the grassroots to make sure that they had agents in every police station. That failure to have agents to protect your mandate and your votes was the undoing of the Labour Party. Did Labour Party win a majority of vote cast in Nigeria? The answer is yes. Was it declared a winner? The answer is no. And that's the reality of Nigerian politics.
Interesting. Let me put this to your principal, Mr. Peter Gregory, has said at least 2 times that they are convinced that they won the election. He said he would prove it in court, and there are people that actually feel that yes, in court, all those things that were brought forward were very tenable. What the court decided yet is another topic for another day. So there's a 2 question in one again. So he said Labour Party won. You're an insider, so it's a straightforward question. I'll give you the follow-up when you give me the answer to this. Do you think Labour Party won the election?
Yes, I do.
You do.
Yes.
So is this based on empirical evidence you have been an insider?
Again, I studied political science. So I'm a student and I'm a practitioner. And I've run for election. There are certain parameters that you could use to adjudge an electoral process as you come up to the run of the election. Let's leave aside the polls. Both domestic and international showed that Peter Obi was clearly ahead. On the day of the election, I sat with my colleagues in a situation room. And as the results were coming in and we're ticking off the win areas, we were clearly in the lead. It was showing on our dashboard. And we had an elaborate system until the numbers stopped showing up from INEC. Actually, I was the first person that said to my colleagues, there's something going on. They're not uploading anymore. And we had to send one of our colleagues down at the Hilton, down to Arise TV to say to them, the IREV is not uploading anymore. And they said they didn't know about it, but they will ask. And they asked. And then INEC confirmed that they had a glitch, so-called glitch. So that pattern was evolving. You're going from 0 to 60, and all of a sudden there's a break. That's one trend. Two, we knew the states where PDP as a party was very strong. We knew the states where the APC was very strong. We had done the calculation in terms of numbers and spread. So let's say Alhaji Bola Tinubu took the whole of the Southwest. Peter Obi took Southeast and part of the South-South, if not all. You can begin to do the maths. It's 5 plus 6, 11. The other one is 5. Atiku took the Northeast, which is 6. The ground zero for the battle became the Northwest, 7 states, and the North Central, 6 states. The entire North Central were pro-Labour, bar none. We campaigned there. We had our people on the ground. We knew. So when you do the permutations and the combinations, and it's not calculus, so it's not hard mathematics, but simple arithmetic, permutations and combinations, the progression we had was very clear in terms of, we knew we were going to win Lagos. We knew we were going to win Ogun State. And the reality was that we had firm support in Ogun State. Pa Adebayo was from Ogun State. Our DG, Doyo Kukwe was from Ogun State. President Obasanjo, who was supported, was from Ogun State. Our first tour of Southwest started in Ogun State. We're down to the grassroots. We had decided to go where we had weaknesses and see if we could win the baseline, marginal, and then not worry where we had votes. So it was very clear. And the fact that INEC would claim that there was a glitch, and the irony of it, and that's the part that creates despondency in some of us, was that we went to court and presented scientific empirical evidence that in a space of 5 months, there was not one glitch on the Amazon server globally. So there couldn't have been a glitch host server for the on the server that hosted the INEC platform. It was thrown out of the window. So it makes you worry, it makes you wonder, it makes you worry. But that is what on the bridge, like you said, under the bridge, what INEC did or what whoever person did is a story for another day.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're Democrats, so we moved on. We believe in the rule of law.
I like that. I do like that, and I respect that a lot. I have one more question for you. Before I ask that one more question, there's a follow-up because I've been listening to you very attentively. And a lot of us believe that the final tally for Lagos was more than what INEC declared. I know we can't talk about figures here, even though the Supreme Court has ruled, and if we can, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of people, and somebody from PDP actually said, based on their tally, that Peter Obi had between 950,000 over 1 million, based on their tally in Lagos. The Tinubu did not even have the requisite 25% after all said and done. Is that true, sir?
I can tell you by our own analysis, which we also presented in court.
Yes, sir.
We won Lagos by a far broader margin than INEC declared. Yes, approximation between 900 and 1 million votes. We were suppressed down to 500,000.
Oh, wow.
We won River State. And that was taken away from us. We won Benue State. That was taken away from us. We won Plateau by a larger margin. And that was suppressed. Again, the court has ruled, so I'm not in violation of court judgment.
Yeah, exactly.
It's water under the bridge.
Under the bridge,
we have to have this discussion. One hopes that someday the spirit will move somebody who was an insider to say this is actually what happened in the national interest, because we have a saying in my local dialect that if you go in search of what killed your father and you don't know what it is, what killed your father is going to kill you. If we make these mistakes, and then we have another saying that when an aberration is not tackled, after a year it becomes the norm. It becomes accepted as the norm. If things have happened here and it's convenient for the sake of politics to allow them to go by so that the country does not implode, so that we can have peace and security, it does not go by any stretch of imagination that is a collective acceptance of things that are untoward that has happened. And we look the other way and say, well, that is history. History has a way of repeating itself in a very devastating way, because what happens then is that the next time around, people say, well, we know what they did the last time. We're not going to give them a second chance. And that will be catalytic in terms of fomenting problems and things like that, which we hope does not happen.
Wow. We've been talking to Mr. Obaze, yes, Oseloka Obaze, erudite scholar, fantastic gentleman. He's an expert in conflict and resolution. He's a consummate diplomat. He's a politician. He's served in Anambra State as secretary to the state government. I mean, we've all heard him. He's made a lot of sense. Now, I'm going to ask you one more question. And as you answer that, we can also come up with your final statement, So before I ask that question, I'm going to chip in one or two things. So it might be 3 questions and one because of time and all that. When I spoke to Professor Anselm Odinkalu, we referenced 1983 elections when in Ondo, I'm sure you can remember, Omoboriwa Jashi, clearly the MPN of that day rigged the election. And when the court were going to rule, they were scared of the Ondo people. They knew they could rise up and, could be a rebellion or whatever. So, and we had a similar scenario in Anambra, your state, where you had Nwobodo and Sisi Ono, and according to Professor Odinkalu, and I've read enough to agree with him that the Anambra people did not show any sign of anger, they just took it like that. But the Ondo people that showed that they weren't going to tolerate it. The court ruled in favor of the people, so to say. That's Ajashi was eventually the governor. So I want you to probably just say why the people's docility will be a problem. Secondly, in that same 1983 election, the second term, yeah, Shagari won by 47%. Now, based on what's happening today, uh, Mr. Tinubu here has 37%. I mean, our opinion here, that doesn't even give room for any bragging right. It's not a pan-Nigeria mandate. And it's clear that the ship of state is more or less rudderless. Do you think the way it came into power or is also affecting and also inclusive of all the baggages they carry, fake certificate and all that, is that a problem? Quickly also, back to Enugu State, the Supreme Court has ruled that in Enugu that the guy that came in with a fake NYC certificate also will remain governor. Do you still think Enugu, the docility of the people is part of problem? So there's similarity in those three questions. So now the final one, which is also I mean, I agree, is there's it's like a chain reaction here that the executive arm of government have captured the judiciary and the legislature, and it does look like everything is just going topsy-turvy. Nobody really knows where the ship of state is going, which led to me asking you if we're still failed state or not. Is there a panacea, a solution, a way? As a political scientist who has probably seen it all from Africa to Europe at the highest level, United Nations, is there a way out? Because to us here, we don't have too much time. It's not a negative statement. It is glaring. Nigeria is spiraling out of hand. Look at what happened in Plateau recently. So I know you can put it all together, that things I'm sure you're very conversant with, and with your closing statement. Over to you, sir.
Yes. Let me deal with the issue of docility. There's a balance between docility and the rule of law. Mm-hmm. Again, it goes back to weak institutions. Check the record and tell me since 1999, how many people have been tried and convicted for violating electoral laws. It's very infinitesimal. Mm-hmm. And psychologically, we've arrived at the point where the masses have begun to say to themselves, my daughter, my son, don't go out on election day, don't go campaigning. Mm-hmm. Those people you're fighting for, their children are all abroad. Their children are not in the field campaigning. If a stray bullet is fired, you're the one that would get killed. There's no compensation. Oh. So it's a mindset. So the docility is one tag. Self-preservation is the other tag. Will you fight for a man who comes to you only once in 4 years, brings bags of rice, brings money, and you vote for him and he disappears, only to come back 4 years later? Is that the kind of person you want to sacrifice your life for? So that answers that question. So it's not so much as docility, but understanding that there's a great dichotomy between those who vie for office and those who they expect to support them. And knowing that if something happens to those people, they don't come back to protect them. That's one aspect of it. The other question is, if we had firm institutions, why is it that in other democracies, even in Africa, look at what happened to Liberia recently. Between George Weah and Boakai, there was a runoff. The margin of error, the margin of defeat was negligible. Very thin, yeah. Mm-hmm. They went back, did a runoff, and the opposition won, and were announced, and the National Electoral Commission declared the results as it were. If we got to a point where we can say, yes, INEC says, you know something, Mr. President, like they said to Jonathan, you lost, and Jonathan accepted. If it happens once or twice at that level, you begin to see it trickle down to the lower level where people are going to say, okay, it's 4 years. The beauty of an election, democratic election, is it has to be periodic, it has to be credible, it has to be genuine. So if I lose in 1917, I can wait for 2021. I ran an election in 1917 as governor. I knew we won that election. It was taken from us, but I refused to go to court because I did not have confidence in the court to overturn the election. Peter Obi did. He was the one singular person that won an election and spent 3 years. And we thank him for that because it inspires confidence. But why am I going to spend my money to go and fight a cause that I know I will lose, even though I might have evidence that I won the election? Then again, Nigerian politics is bereft of ideology. And that is why I'm able to move from PDP to Labour, by move from Labour to PRP, and PRP person will move to APC, and APC person will move to, and nobody says, oh, if there were strict Labours, which has identified me over the years as a communist, I can't leave the Communist Party and say I'm a Democrat and people will take me seriously. I think the closest we've come to that is Aminu Kano and PRP, which was a socialist party, and then Tuji Braithwaite. So if you moved from there and go to the mainstream, you became a bit suspicious. People became a bit suspicious of you. So that is one aspect of it. Now, to come to, before I get to your other question, the problem we have in the country is that the failure in governance that we're experiencing right now is what I call the end point of government abdicating its responsibility and its accountability. Its accountability to people and the responsibility to protect. And by and large, and I'm guilty, just like you are and the rest of us, we as citizens, the office of the citizen, which used to be, we ought to be the preeminent office in the land, is not as strong as it ought to be. We have foreclosed on our responsibility to hold our public officials accountable. So we have a catch-22 situation. The distrust gap between we, the led, and the leaders continues to expand. It used to be a small fissure, now it's wide. And this has resulted from the diminishing or the waning strength of government. I wrote a book in 2021 called The Waning Strength of Government. This is what has happened, that the government is so diminished, and this has translated into political lethargy, broad resignation on the part of the citizen. And when you combine this with, I'm using labels now, and forgive me, with primordial interest and prebendalism, the so-called kakistocracy, where people in government continue to loot the government as if there was no law and order. The average man on the street say, well, they don't care. They do their own thing, and I will do my own thing. But I've said this also, which was, I think I made a reference in my 2017 book, Here to Serve. The problem we have in Nigeria, the most serious problem we face in Nigeria, is not actually corruption. It is greed, because it is only greed that will make a man steal 1 million, steal 100 million, steal 1 billion, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 80-something billion. What is he doing with it? And then his community, in response to that, honors him with a title. So where's the citizen's responsibility? Oga, you've been indicted for stealing money. Don't come here and throw away your money. Go away, we don't need you. No, but instead they bestow him a traditional title. And this happens every day in Nigeria. People steal money, they go to the church, the pastor put them in the front seats and pray for them. So the citizen has abandoned his or her responsibility. But what is fundamental is this. There is absolute lack of repercussion for underachievement in Nigeria. Who in Nigeria has ever been held accountable for substandard performance? So those are the things that bother us. But we're in a democracy. I stopped using the word nascent democracy because 1999 to this, we've crossed the 20-year line. So we're not toddlers anymore, even though comparatively to the larger democracies, we're still a young democracy. But we should have learned, because if you look at countries like Namibia, Botswana, even Ghana to some extent, these are stable democracies. They've been. And these are countries that used to look up to Nigeria. They don't look don't look up to us anymore.
Ghana has transited from opposition to ruling party so many times.
Yeah. And we are, even though we can pound our chest and say that since 1999, we've had successive planning, that's fine. But that brings us to the final point. A democracy like ours calls for strict adherence to the separation of powers. The three arms of government are equal but separate. They are independent, and that independence must be respected. The relationship we have now between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary is not incestuous. And that is dangerous. It is dangerous for our country. And what it has resulted to is what we refer to as state capture. Now, there's no checks and balances. The legislature is no longer the ninth National Assembly used to be rubber stamp. That's what we call them. The 10th National Assembly is a validation point. They don't even ask. They say, just bring it. We'll write the script and stamp it for you, and you come and collect it. And that's not what we expected. In my lifetime as a student of politics, I have never seen a judiciary that has been castigated as much as the present judiciary we have in Nigeria. And people think it is okay. No. There are two things that's happening in Nigeria, and I'll hope we can end on that note. The first is we have embraced a cancel culture in which says that for me to win, I have to make sure, contrive every means possible to make sure that Ade loses. The option of me winning and Ade winning or Ade getting something is unacceptable. So I must cancel your aspirations. I must cancel your needs. I must cancel the resources that you need. I must cancel the office that you want. I must cancel everything that makes you want to be, that you look for in the pursuit of happiness as a citizen. I have to cross it out so that I will be in charge. It optimizes the zero-sum game. And that's why you have this syndrome of us versus them. That's our politics now. Is the Igbos versus the Yorubas. Is the Southwest versus the Southeast. Is the Fulanis versus the Hausas. Is the Karunis versus the Fulanis. It is the Ijesha man versus the Ondo man. It is, even in Igbo land, it is the Abia man versus the Enugu man. Us versus them. That is the type of politics we have brought into fore. And that is dangerous. The second factor is that we have one nation, two publics. One public is devoted to primordial interest. I am, and Ade is one of us, because we belong to the same religion, we belong to the same ethnicity, we belong to the same sub-region, we belong to the same town. The other component of the republic is civic, which continues to preach the rule of the law. And in which case, I will say, oh, you say, Oga, Ade cannot get this. I said, is he qualified? Yes. So why can he not get it? Well, he's not one of us. No. The law says he is prima facie qualified, give it to him, regardless. But if I must then say, well, we have to find a way, put in the council culture to cancel him out so that the man from Anambra State like me can get it, it defeats the entire purpose. There's no confidence building measure whatsoever in what we do. This is also happening because the owners of Nigeria, the national elite, have refused to. If you think of the 2014 confab report that was never implemented, you think of the Orosanya report that was never implemented, they're all on the shelves. So we have the solutions. But everybody says, hey, if you implement this report, it's going to impact negatively on Oseloka, Obaze and the people of Anambra State. Look at what is happening nationwide, in Abuja, in Lagos, in Enugu, in Anambra. Governments are demolishing buildings put up by people. And you ask yourself, Nigeria is a country that has over close to 70 million by UN account deficits in homes, in housing. And people have built homes, whether they are ramshackle homes or huge edifices. To build a house, you have to get the town planning permit, you have to get architectural, structural, everything. And they go through this process and complete a whole house in Abuja, in Lagos, everywhere. Then you go and demolish it. Meanwhile, there are people sleeping under the bridge. What it says is the rules of the road, the checks and balances, that should start with the local government, because you cannot build anywhere outside the local government. You build in the local government locality. The federating units, federal, state, and local government. Is the federal government, is the local government that will give you the permit to say you can build here or you cannot build here. The zoning law says you cannot build here because it's the waterway. It's the local government. So if the people in the local government collect money from me and look the other way, allow me to dig the foundation, to get to the German floor, to get to the lintel level, they don't knock it down, to get to the decking, to finish, to paint and occupy. And they come 3 months later after occupy to say they're going to knock it down. There's something wrong, inherently wrong with that system.
I agree.
So we create our own problems because what affects our day, I believe, does not affect me. But eventually the chicken comes home to roost. Because what affected our day yesterday becomes my headache tomorrow. And until we begin to think in terms of short, medium, and long term, we're going to be running around in circles like crabs. The reality of Nigeria today, where we are, we have pretended for over a long period as if we don't know what the solutions are. We know. But there comes a time when delusion meets with reality. And I hope that when that day comes, we can be like some parts of Czech and Slovakia that separated, the velvet separation, if that is what it's called for. And not like the hump former Yugoslavia that fought wars and destroyed each other. There's no need for that. Like I said at the beginning, Nigeria is a big country, but it's not too big to fail. But Nigeria does not need to fail. I think we have all the qualities, we're endowed with all the natural resources and the human capital to keep Nigeria whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We've been talking to Oseloka area Obaze. I'm sure we all had fun today. We've all been enlightened. And most of the things I said today is things we have said here in the past. We're inherently dishonest as a people. I've said it so many times. That's where the fundamental problem is the church is not saying the truth. The traditional worshippers are not saying the truth. The Islamic people are not saying the truth. You said something I really like when you talk about party politics in Latin and South America. The Catholic Church played a very strategic role in those countries, something the church has not done very well in Africa. So we're going to call it a wrap there. But I can assure you, you're going to be back. There's so much to trash out. I will be here for about an hour, 20 minutes. We hardly do that, but we love it. You're saying truth, the truth to power. What is important, however, is that we have never used our best 11 in Nigeria. We have the people, the requisite manpower. Nigerians are doing extraordinary things all over the world, but we don't use the right people. It's a big shame that we use tribe and religious sentiments to pick who rules. Or now we're in what you call a morass. We're spearing always almost down into the abyss. But like Henry said, the day will come when realism meets with delusion. I hope and I pray that it will be done properly. It's going to be a wrap. Thank you for your loyalty. Thank you, Mr. Oseloka Obaze. Like I said, you're going to be back here, I'm sure not too far from now. Thank you, our loyal, we are 7 continents, 7 billion people, fantastic people. Take care. And next week, we're going to come to you with another wonderful topic. Take care and God bless you all.